slowly but surely. Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to the Foresight Sanity Preserver. I think this is now, oh my God, maybe the 18th edition. Before we're going to launch into anything, I would love to see how much of an introduction I should be giving, because I see many familiar faces, which is amazing, and a few new faces as well. So I'm going to launch a poll, and you should be seeing a poll popping up right now, and it would be amazing if you could take that so that I have an understanding of how much you know. The questions are quite simple. It's asking, is this your first Foresight Salon? Where are you located? How are you feeling? Can you see the poll? Okay, poll is launched. All right, thank you so much. So I'm seeing that at least we have one person, 10 out of 15 voted. Most of you have already been to a Foresight Salon, which is amazing. Probably also many of you have been to a Sanity Preserver Salon. One person hasn't. All of you are located in North America. Crazy. And then only one person's feeling quite negative. We have a few people feeling kind of mediocre, a few folks, oh no, most folks feeling kind of good, and then 3 people feeling like through the roof, super happy. And Creon will definitely change this. Maybe I can make it so that we can take this poll another time at the end of it, and let's see how many 5s we get afterwards. Well, okay, so I'm gonna share a little bit about the info in the salons just in the chat, so I don't bore the ones that have joined a few in the past, which at this point really are many of you. I'm super, super happy to have many of you here. I'm Alison Düppmann. I'm a researcher at Foresight Institute. I'm the incoming president, and I have started those salons kind of as an impetus to kind of like try to make sense of COVID-19, try to kind of like showcase projects that are doing good work, and trying to kind of like use it as a kind of like as really a Kickstarter for kind of like discussing ideas that would usually seem crazy and radical, but that may now kind of like hit on ears that are willing to listen, because we're in a crisis moment and nothing seems too crazy. So a few words about Creon. Man, where do I start? Really, really hard. Yeah, hard. Like, yeah, I'm lacking the words. Creon is not only, I think, one of the people that I most align with in thinking, but also really the humans that I hold most dear in San Francisco. And there's been really no day where kind of I go about and I don't have a little Creon simulation running in my head where I'm like, oh, what would Creon do in this moment? I'm super happy that, Creon, I speak to you 4 times a day. This is amazing, twice in the Sanity Preservers and twice via phone calls. And currently you have the whole of the Embasites joining to make this a public viewing of you. We have artichoke hearts, we have champagne and wine. So this will be very, very much happening here for all of us.
Well, I have vodka and soda, so cheers, everyone.
He's pouring himself some vodka and soda. If you want to take a look, we have like a really nice setup over here and a lot of really happy faces joining. We wish it could be on a projector, but here we go. We're all incredibly stoked that you're here. We are dying to hear the upsides of COVID-19, and we're making this a little watch party. So with that, without further ado, I will post a little bit about your bio in the group, but you know, you've been to every single Foresight Sanity Preserver so far, and throughout kind of like the Sanity Preservers, you really kind of like have taken notes of like what are the kind of like what are the upsides of this, how can we use this for a positive outcome. And so I'm super happy to kind of like learn from you what you've learned throughout the salons, and then I'm super stoked about the video that you're going to share at the end. And yeah, I mean, I can't wait we can't wait to have our collective minds blown and to reach the 5 on the happiness scale after your talk. Let's see. No pressure, Creon. But with that being said, I'm going to switch you around so everyone can see you here.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll give you the stage. What are the upsides of COVID? What do you have for us?
Okay, well, these are some notes, as Alison mentioned, that I've been taking as we go through this new world. And some of the ideas are original. Many of them are shamelessly stolen from people I've heard at these conferences, these sites, and stuff I've found online. Try to give credit where I've stolen something. And I don't know exactly why I got kind of obsessed with this idea of what are the upsides, but I'm glad I did, because otherwise, I think, yeah, I don't know how much these seminars have preserved my sanity, perhaps at least as much as looking for the upsides. So I like this, and at the end, I'll come back with how I think we can continue it. So I don't want to make it sound like, you know, I think this is a great thing, and I'm glad it happened necessarily, but I am going to go through a lot of potential benefits and good things that that either will happen, I'm pretty sure, or that may happen, or that we could make happen if we did it right. They'll sort of be arranged in those kinds of levels of certainty, at least in my mind. But I do want to say that, like, almost for every one of these things that I say that is good or might be good, there's kind of a shadow version of it, right? That could be bad, or another way of framing it that makes it look like a, you know, a mixed blessing at best. It's not an outright curse, but I'm going to stick on the positive side for now. There's so much negative going around, and I think it's useful, existential hope and all that. But each of these has a shadow side. And normally my talks are very visual with lots of technology and, you know, tons of visuals, but that's usually when I'm trying to teach something. And here I'm just trying to kind of talk about some abstract things and, you know, not do a physics or chemistry or math thing, but sort of abstract. So I'm going to, as I said, organize them somewhat from certain to speculative, at least in my mind. They're going to be in 4 classes. I'm going to talk about technical and medical upsides. I'm going to talk about potential economic upsides, and then potential cultural, but not necessarily economic upsides, and then a short bit at the end on sort of a spiritual upsides to it. And these are obviously not hard and fast boundaries. I really liked what Anders talked about yesterday about the 3 axes of technology, insight, and coordination, and how we can try and make things happen along all these axes. And if I had the time, I might have tried to reorganize along those lines, but I did not. Okay, so I'm going to first talk about the technical ones, and I'm going to talk about the one that I'm actually most certain of. And so for that, I'm going to just give a tiny bit of history. I studied, when I was young in the 80s and 90s, I studied a lot of quantum mechanics and quantum chemistry was the thing I was really working on a lot at NASA, or quantum molecular physics. And that kind of led me into nanotechnology, and that's how I got involved with the Foresight Institute in the 90s. And that's where, I'm not a bragger in general, but I was co-recipient of the Richard P. Feynman Prize in nanotechnology, I think in '94, and that is by far my most greatest honor that I feel that I've ever received, and the thing I'm most proud of and most happy. And so that still sits on my desk. Anyway.
Who awards that prize, Creon?
The Foresight Institute, back then it was the Foresight Institute, I think, for molecular nanotechnology. But anyway, the prize was in molecular. I'm sorry I didn't mention that, Brad. Yeah. So that's sort of my early connection to Foresight. And anyway, I was really into quantum chemistry, and then that sort of led me into molecular biology, okay? And I was dabbling in molecular biology mostly because I found it interesting in like the late 80s, early 90s. But it's interesting because I was interested in it because I had read this book just to sort of introduce myself to biology. I just kind of picked it off the shelf by walking into the bookstore and doing like the bibliomantic trance. And I picked this one off the shelf, and it was by this virologist named Renato Del Becco. The book is called The Design of Life. And it's sort of an introduction to modern biology in 1990 style through the lens of virology. But he introduces all of biology and molecular biology kind of from a virologist's point of view. So I was reading that, and then I had this friend, Ellen Heber-Katz, who's also now associated with Foresight. Alison knows her now. And, but back then in the 90s, she was working on the T-cell receptor MHC interaction and vaccine development. So I got to know her and started collaborating with her on some stuff. I could do stuff on the computer, and she was doing stuff in the lab. And she was working on this T-cell receptor MHC interaction problem, which is, I mean, why was she working on this problem? Okay, it was because of AIDS. There was a huge drive to understand AIDS. And this was during the middle of the AIDS crisis. And I'm not quite sure how many of you are old enough to have lived through the AIDS crisis, but it was bad, okay? We had a worldwide pandemic. And I want you to think about this for a minute. It was spreading worldwide. It spread through sex, and it spread from mother to child. And it could be spread from one sexual encounter. And there was no treatment, and there was no cure, and there was and still is no vaccine. And it was attacking people in the prime of their life. And people thought it might just spread worldwide and wipe everyone out because it spread through sex and it spread from parent to child. And so, and there was no treatment. And so people were very worried, and all of biology was kind of pivoting to focus on AIDS and the AIDS virus and potential treatments. And its core to this was the T-cell receptor and MHC, because that is the core of the human adaptive immune system, which is the very thing which fights off the coronavirus and every virus pretty much that infects you in a detrimental way. And many of the viruses infect you in a non-detrimental way, by the way, the majority of them. But there were just tens of thousands of molecular biologists concentrating to find a treatment for AIDS. And they were digging down into the immune system at this molecular level that was way more detailed than anything that had happened before. And no one knew any of this stuff before. And a great much of what was developed, like PCR, bioinformatics, and automated assays, and advanced X-ray crystallography, and advanced sequencing, and lots of biological theory and lab techniques were developed. Well, they were scaled and revolutionized, if not developed outright as a component of the worldwide effort against AIDS. And eventually, you know, although there was no vaccine found, some treatments were found, and, you know, the AIDS disease was eventually brought under management after killing just huge numbers of innocent people in the primes of their lives. But as a side result of all that effort, there was a gigantic increase in understanding of viruses in general, of the immune system, of particularly the adaptive immune system, and of all kinds of other things in molecular biology. So this is now going to happen again, but like 10 times over with SARS-CoV-2. Okay, every biologist in the world, practically every virologist, every immunologist, every infectious disease specialist, every public health person is going to be working on this for obvious reasons, as well as all these bioinformatics people and physicists and, you know, everybody, right? Entrepreneurs, investors, philanthropists, they're all going to be concentrating their brain power on this to a large extent. And so I don't know if we're ever going to get a good treatment or a good vaccine. You know, we didn't get a good vaccine for AIDS, but that's another thing, because it attacks the very immune system that you'd want to use to respond to a vaccine, which fortunately SARS-CoV-2 does not. It's a traditional virus, like attacking the lungs and stuff like this, instead of attacking the immune system, which is a very subtle thing that AIDS did. But anyway, there will be another revolution in all these fields, virology, infectious diseases and stuff. And while we may not exactly dispense with this virus as quickly as some people hope, we will unlock a huge amount of knowledge about human biology and microbiology, and I hope this time about systems biology, which is a relatively newer field, and which I think actually holds the key to not just this virus and its effects, but a whole lot of problems that we have that are of a biological nature right now. So that's going to happen. I'm sure about that. Now, who knows, maybe along with it, we'll get a cure for the common cold and, you know, other things like this. All kinds of things can come from focusing on these viruses. And of course, all this focus, not just on virology and molecular biology, but on public health and all this, as you know, we've talked about this before, it's like preparation for the big one, right? I mean, this is not the big one. It's a big one. You know, it could get really bad, particularly if we overreact, but this is not, you know, SARS-1. That this is not something that kills 40% of the people it comes in contact with, right? It kills maybe, you know, far, far, far less than that. So in a way, we can thank our lucky stars that this isn't worse or a more deadly virus than it is. Okay, now another technical scientific thing that I think we're going to learn from this, an upside. I mean, most of these upsides are things we're going to learn, but maybe they're also things we're going to change, okay? And this is both, okay? I think there's an elephant in the room here in terms of the effects of this virus, okay? And the elephant in the room is what I will, it's immunological health, it's metabolic health, and it's the actual efficacy of various Western and Eastern medical systems. I believe that we can probably use this, if we are lucky, we can use this pandemic as a lever to correct some of the systemic failures and what is being called the medieval mentality of the medical establishment, including the FDA, the CDC, the USDA, and all this kind of stuff. Because what we're going to learn, probably sooner rather than later, it's already starting to become somewhat clear, at least to me, although it might be confirmation bias in that case. We're going to learn what causes susceptibility, complications, and most deadly cases of this disease. Like, how can there be asymptomatic cases, people who don't even know they have it, and then fight it off? And on the other hand, we can have mild cases, moderate cases, serious cases, fatal cases. Like, obviously, it can't just be random, right? There's got to be some factors in here. And of course, some of them are going to be like how much you're exposed to, and there's going to be some luck and like that. But presumably in the era of big data and machine learning and diagnostics and all sorts of testing and low-cost sequencing, if anything can help us with untangling the factors, it should be those things. And I think, there's going to be genetic factors and cultural factors and political factors and economic factors, exposure factors, environment factors, lifestyle factors. But the elephant in the room, I believe, is metabolic health and immunological health. It's metabolic syndrome, it's obesity, it's hypertension, it's coronary heart disease, and all of these problems kind of go under the rubric of chronic inflammation, okay? Which is very related to the cytokine storm thing. We'll get to that, okay? So let's see, can I put up, share my screen for just a sec? Please excuse me, you're gonna see, share screen, desktop, yeah, okay.
It's the big green one. Oh yeah, wait.
Yeah. Okay. So can you guys see that thing in the middle there? Let's see. I can't really see what I got. Can you see this little table?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So here's the thing. You've probably seen this kind of stuff. This is actually recent data from the last few days from Louisiana. Okay. And these are the percentage of deaths and the people who have these various complications. 28% of the people who died were obese. 31% had chronic kidney disease. Now, and then this might be kind of just weird bias because I mean, I'm sure 28% of the people are obese anyway in Louisiana. So it's kind of hard to disentangle this stuff. But as you may also recall, the latest news from Italy is that something like 98% of the people who died in Italy had underlying metabolic problems. Okay, and I think this is very important to keep in mind. And so, not only that, I think it's going to be untangled. Like, we're going to find out, and now I'm going to get on a bit of a soapbox here, but I've been obsessed with this for years. And this is playing out kind of exactly like I thought it was going to, okay? These diseases are mostly a result of high carbohydrate diets, high sugar diets, high refined carbs, and even unrefined carbs, high oxidized omega-6 seed oils, and probably high lectins and high oxalates, okay? These all cause these conditions that cause chronic inflammation, hyperinsulinemia, which leads to high blood pressure, coronary heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and all the problems pretty much which are linked with high mortality from COVID, okay? And by the way, they're not just linked from high mortality than COVID, they kill way more people than COVID's ever gonna kill, okay? Every year, all right? So, this is a terrible thing, but maybe people are gonna notice this. Maybe this information is gonna be true and surfaced and not suppressed by the same forces that keep it suppressed now to keep selling their sugar and their processed food and their stupid medicine to fight these problems instead of using healthy diet. And so maybe this will surface and maybe people will wake up. And this is going to be good because here is a sort of dark upside to the whole thing. I've been obsessed with this because what I've been seeing up until the pandemic was an unfolding 30-year train wreck that was going to happen as the 30, then 40, then 50, then 70% of Americans and others in developed countries came down with diabetes because they have pre-diabetes now, okay? And as this unfolded over the next 30 years and all these people became debilitated and requiring medical care and unable to work productively, or many of them, you know, and this was going to bankrupt the healthcare system and bankrupt the governments of many countries. Europe, US, and even India and China are like heading down the same curve, okay, with these degenerative so-called diseases of civilization. And I would thought that like, oh my God, over the next 30 years, this is going to be terrible. It's going to overload all the hospitals. It's going to bankrupt the medical systems. It's going to, you know, cause all these deaths and misery. How could we possibly stop this, you know? And now I'm thinking, well, maybe it's all just going to be compressed in 2 or 3 years, or maybe enough of it is going to be compressed into 2 or 3 years that that people will wake up. So there's an article recently in the New York Times, for instance, just came out, I think yesterday. Most of the US population is too sick to return to work. And what they mean by that is actually, people are getting so much sicker now with these diseases, independent of the virus, that sending them back to work is actually going to be a big problem. Okay, so I think that when the dust settles, we're going to see that this inflammatory diet, pollution and smoking included also in there, are major, if not dominant, comorbidities. And I think this is a warning shot. And I think someday that eating this way and treating your body this way to create these disease states, and having doctors that promote it, because the whole food pyramid is upside down, and you know, all this stuff is just wrong. The AMA, the USDA, all these people have really got it wrong. Eric Weinstein is right. The institutions have completely failed us in this case. And so maybe this will be set to rights when it becomes obvious who's dying from this, in large, you know, statistically speaking. And eating this way and doing this to yourself will be viewed as like driving in a car without a seatbelt. Like, you don't do it if you care for yourself. You don't do it if you care for your children. And if you do it and you get hurt, your insurance won't cover you. So that's interesting. Oh, here's an interesting and little ironic thing. I just want to show this. Maybe some of you saw this. Have you seen this chart, allegedly from the CDC, although I'd really like to track down the data? This is weekly all-cause mortality in the US, and the different colors are different years, okay? And you'll notice that this year, 2020, we're down to, this is mid-March, we're down to far less all-cause mortality during the pandemic. So it's kind of ironic that it may turn out to be that because people are staying
home. I think that particular chart has been retracted by the authors because it used provisional, that particular chart.
I can't really hear you, Adam, but I think you said redacted or retracted.
It's retracted, yeah.
Oh, well, I thought it would still be funny if after all this fuss, less people were dying, but I kind of figured it was too good to be true. Okay, but anyway, I do want to say something about that chart, which is that
Adam is just an advertisement. Get headsets, everybody.
Yeah, right. Sure is. But an interesting thing about that chart, I don't know if you noticed. Let me just show one thing. Even if the that's the wrong one. Even if it's wrong about that little downturn, you'll notice that the death rates are much higher for all years in the winter months, which are, you know, like January and December. And I'd like to point out that those are, am I still sharing or not?
Yes, you are.
You are.
Oh.
I don't want to be sharing.
Yeah.
Stop sharing. Okay. Those higher death rates in the winter months are because of quote unquote flu season, which I think, and Ivor Cummins thinks, who's much smarter than I am about this stuff, you should listen to everything he ever speaks on, is that flu season is really vitamin D deficiency season because of the low sun in the northern hemisphere where most people live. So take your vitamin D, particularly if you're not out in the sun. It looks like that's a pretty seriously useful compound to fight off all sorts of things, including viruses. You know, I used to be very skeptical about vitamins, but when I studied vitamin D, I really changed my tune on that. So I take 5,000 a day and have it for a long time. Anyway.
When is flu season in the Southern Hemisphere?
I presume it's in the winter in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, but I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, CDC says you should continue doing flu vaccines even now until the end of April as well, just regular flu vaccines. So.
Okay. All right. So in general, I'm really looking forward to some real insights as the big data comes in about what the factors are. And while I'm in favor of vaccination pretty much, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I'm not a universal global vaccinate everybody right away against everything person. I think we have to be careful. And one thing we have to be particularly careful of is this one size fits all thing. Like, I don't want people to think that just because they've gotten some vaccine, and by the way, the flu vaccine isn't that great. It doesn't work all that well, as you well know. It doesn't seem, the latest Cochrane surveys say that it hardly has any effect at all on hospitalizations and days missed from work. So anyway, you know, it's probably not a bad idea. But I mean, let's not put all our eggs in that basket. And I think that if we can figure out why some people don't get symptoms and some people don't get sick, that'll be at least as valuable as a vaccine. Because that's probably a general technique to ward off all kinds of similar diseases, as opposed to the vaccines, which have to be constantly playing a cat and mouse game. Okay, so that's enough for the technical stuff. Now, economic upsides. Okay, so first, with the economic reality here, I think what we're seeing is what happens when you engage in a race to the bottom. I think there's a lesson here. When you engage in a race to the bottom, where do you think you end up? You end up at the bottom, you know? Everybody ends up at the bottom. And I don't think we want that. I think we want stuff that doesn't break. We want stuff that doesn't need to be repaired or need to be rebought. And we want a society that makes and values that kind of stuff, even if it costs a little more, even if the profits are a little lower. We don't want throwaway infrastructure. We want an emphasis on quality versus quantity. I think that might come about from this. I think people may realize that they don't need infinite amounts of cheap plastic junk delivered to their house all the time. Along those lines, I think we will learn that we need to move away from just-in-time inventory for all things, particularly as Ethan pointed out, for non-perishable goods, for things like medicines and emergency supplies, and you know, stuff that can be laid in warehouses and not spoil. We're going to want them in warehouses not spoiling, because having everything be just in time so that you can save, you know, a penny on the dollar is not worth it when you consider the tail risk, and not similarly concentrating all your global supply chains in one particular part of the world just because it's cheaper. You know, putting all the manufacturing capacity there, particularly for medicine and medical supplies, in one overcrowded virus-producing region that's famous for virus production and exporting pandemics, and that seems to have a transparency problem, maybe not a great idea in retrospect, even if you can shave off a few % more profit by doing it that way. So hopefully we may learn these lessons, that our margins were too thin, not the profit margins, but the resiliency margins. They were too thin in durable goods. They were too thin in all sorts of industries, the hospitality industry, in medicine, in hospitals, in airlines. We better hope that, you know, the margins aren't similarly too thin in the food system, in the electricity generation, you know, in gas, natural gas, and internet. Like, we better hope that there's excess capacity and resiliency in those systems beyond what we've seen in some of our other systems recently. It looks like there are. So perhaps those hadn't, perhaps because some of them were public utilities and distributed systems, they haven't been quote unquote optimized like some of the global capitalist kind of private systems have been. Okay, so yeah, I think that in addition to understanding the importance of localized manufacturing and having distributed supply systems, we're going to particularly want to pay attention to that in food production. In fact, I almost hope there's a bit of a food crisis, because I think people have to realize that the current world food system with industrial monocrop agriculture and global shipping of you know, giant amounts of monocrop GMO grains around the planet, grown in depleted soils using fossil fuel-based fertilizer is not the way to do it. We've got about 60 years left before the world's soils collapse, mostly, which is arguably a much more serious problem than climate change, as well as a major contributor to climate change. And so a pause on the use of fertilizers, pesticides, and acceleration of regenerative agriculture to reinvigorate local healthy food and healthy soil production, while admittedly not all that likely, is something that perhaps we should all expend some effort on, trying to steer ourselves in that direction. I mean, kind of like, probably the food system is going to be okay, which means it's going to be business as usual, which means we're going to continue to ruin the soil for another few decades, but maybe not. Maybe there'll be a perturbation, or maybe people will start to think a little more locally in terms of their food sources. We shall see. I can hope so. I mean, I've become obsessed also with this regenerative agriculture thing over the last few years. And I'd say, do what you can. Like, think about this crisis to do something that really changes the world at the highest level. And I think regenerative ag is one of those things. But like, many of you are young, energetic, healthy, relatively well off, and perhaps have some time on your hands. So I would say, learn about regenerative agriculture, regenerative hydrology, regenerative aquaculture. This is intimately tied in with the health issues I alluded to above, because the crappy monocrop soy and corn syrup and soy oil and all this stuff is what's making people sick. And so, like, most of the world actually needs fewer calories. They just need higher quality calories. And so, think about this. I urge you. What is the minimum viable product we could use to, like, course correct on this? And what is the maximum we could do? What is the maximum we want to do? Okay, so a little bit more, and then I'll be kind of, wrapping it up here, getting into the cultural stuff. We've got someone sharing their email here.
You're screen sharing.
That's not me.
Sean Murphy, I love your emails, but I don't think you want to share it with everyone.
No.
Okay. Anyway, someone's going to have to cut him off.
Yep.
Okay, so
Allison, you can do that.
all right. So the other night I was watching the movie Fantastic Fungi again, and because there was a thing by the producers and the stars, they were having like a round table on Zoom, and Suzanne Simard, who's one of the principals in that film, says that the virus is saying, let's take a pause, okay? The virus is saying to us, let's take a pause. And then you've probably seen some of this kind of memes about this. Brewster Kahle, months ago, when this thing was just starting to bubble up, predicted that there was going to be what he called the Great Pause. Great word, I think. And Bloomberg just released an article with planet imagery in it, by the way, showing this pause, okay? So there's going to be an economic pause, and it's going to be massive, right? With massive recession and unemployment, maybe even worse. Okay, so this is both a problem and an opportunity, right? I've always been pretty much in favor of capitalism, but it does have some things that probably need to be tuned up and fixed a little bit. And now's our chance to really have some serious discussions about this. And it seems like that's a very loud beeping. Whoever's got their mic on. There is even the U.S. government, right, which is like, what is it, long seemed to be the captive of heartless corporate interest, has released hundreds of billions of dollars in direct payments to family. Even Donald Trump, not known as a paragon of compassion, and I'm quoting here, has put a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. You can take a cynical view of all this stuff, but nonetheless, they do embody, at least, they do seem to embody a principle of caring for vulnerable people. So I forget who it was who was talking to me about this. It might have been Adam Brown. It seems like we should be able to have an economy that is capable of pausing. As he pointed out, the French do it every August for a month. So we know it's possible. And perhaps we should just prepare for it. And perhaps there will be some real upsides to having such a thing. And it is obviously possible. So some more upsides. These are kind of random. These came out of some of the earlier Foresight Sanity Preservers X-risk community is probably taken a little more seriously now. I don't actually know if the X-risk community is going to be taken more seriously because frankly, it's as Anders pointed out in his talk the other day, this has been in the biology textbooks, and this has been in novels, and this has been in the hot zone, you know, in popular books. I mean, all the people who know about this stuff have been saying for a long time that it was only a matter of time before this happened, and it happened, okay? So I don't know, maybe the X-risk people, I mean, I suppose if it had been an asteroid strike, we could have found people who had warned against that, and if it had been, you know, any particular risk, I'm sure we'd be able to find somebody who's warning against it. But this was pretty universal in the virology community and the infectious disease community. And it's, I mean, it's not only universal, it's like, this isn't even the first time. I mean, pandemic after pandemic has emerged from Wuhan and from similar situations. So we really shouldn't be all that surprised, right? So maybe an upside of this is we might start listening to the experts, okay? That would be amazing as a society. Welcome change and take the tail risks a little more seriously. So these are all things that might actually work to our advantage and save us from things, from even worse events, or at least give us a little a leg up in future serious problems. There's a general advantages to hard times. I don't need to get into them all, but you know, some of them may be over romanticized, but it tends to focus people, and if things go right, it can cause them to band together and set aside their differences. But specifically to COVID-19, this is a global thing, so that's interesting. It's biological, it's non-ideological, it's non-sectarian, it's non-political, and it's also non-zero sum. I mean, to a large extent, it's like, you know, we either all suffer or we all get helped. The knowledge can transport rapidly as soon as things are known about how to make things better. So this is very interesting. It's one of the first times we've had a sort of immediate global biological, non-ideological, non-sectarian, non-political, non-religious kind of problem. I mean, you might say climate change is like that, or, you know, the threat of nuclear war maybe, although that is certainly political. I mean, but those are kind of more distant in space and time. This is more immediate. And so I think people aren't going to argue about whether it's a hoax for much longer. Peter Diamandis said it quite well, and I'm sure others have been saying pretty much the same thing. For the first time, we have a common enemy that is obvious and unambiguous, you know, as opposed to climate change or loss of biodiversity, which are just harder to feel immediately for most people. On the other hand, I don't know how, well, here's a weird upside. I suspect but do not know that the panic and shutdown, at least for the US and much of Europe, may do more harm than good. But in the end, the net suffering will be worse if we distance for too long and shut down too much. Unemployment, unrest, division, and decay. It's hard to know because we're talking about like a counterfactual and a future prediction sort of bundled together here. But if it's true, if we end up realizing that we overreacted, at least in many ways, and over-panicked, then there's even an upside to that, because then perhaps we'll learn to be a little braver in the face of adversity. We may learn that we don't have to overreact, we don't have to panic. We're actually stronger than we thought, and we'll learn to be honest. And there's another thing that I think is related that will come out of this, and I have some interesting links on this that I'm going to share at the end, which I'm getting close to, which is that we're going to have honest discussions about what people have been calling the dollar value of a human life. I don't really see it that way. It's much more subtle than that. It's about weighing the effort and the suffering that happen with different courses of action. We have to be sort of come with this accounting of suffering so that we don't end up making a lot more people suffer a lot worse because we use these stupid taglines like, we don't, like, what's his name, Cuomo, and we don't put a dollar value on a human life. And it's like, of course you do. Insurance companies do it every day. You know, the medical systems do it every day. You know, the National Health Service in the UK, they have whole giant committees that do this exact thing. It's not like it's pleasant, but it has to be done. And we're going to have to come to terms with that here in the US, that we have to weigh the costs and benefits in terms of suffering of these various things, including overreaction and including care rationing and all this hard stuff. So I have a really nice article by Malcolm McKendrick on that I'll include in the links. The last thing I want to say, one of the last things I want to talk about is blame. I think we're going to find that there's enough blame to go around on this. You know, I know all my friends are going to want to blame Trump, and, you know, all the Trump people are going to want to blame, you know, China. And it's like, there's enough blame to go around here, okay? China has a lot of problems. US leaders, the institutions, and the public, big pharma, big tech, social media, the billionaires, everybody has screwed up to one degree or another, pretty much, in this. And in the end, it's going to turn out that it probably was nowhere near as bad as it could have been. And the disease, actually, while bad, was not as bad as people feared. And perhaps we will learn that fear and blame are the mind killers, and that we can be brave, and we can be open, and we can be honest, and we can, you know, admit that we were wrong and learn from our mistakes. Okay, so a couple more things. The Sanity Preserver Salons, they're an upside of the epidemic. And in general, this kind of thing is these new friends, this new way of meeting together online, a way that, like, well, for most people, I'm not sure about all of you right now, but for most of the meetings I'm in on Zoom, people are actually looking at each other and talking to each other instead of distracted on their laptops, which is, in a way, very different from the meetings I go to at work in meeting rooms where everyone is like head down on their phones and their laptops most of the time. So it's almost in a way that the meetings are better in this virtual world. So who would have thought? You know, and families are doing it, and we have quality time inside to some extent. More people have more time with kids. People are rediscovering reading and books. Remember those? And discussion and listening. They're discovering rituals like bathing and check-ins and meditation and exercise and things that they quote unquote didn't have time for before. Why didn't they have time? Because they were too busy traveling and commuting and flying all over the world and waiting on security lines at the airports and all these things that they're not doing now. So apparently they have more time. I don't know. It's just very interesting, this pivot. And it's got to help for people to break their routines. Working from home, is there a productivity increase or decrease? I have to say that on one of my big teams at Planet, we've had much higher productivity working from home. We've been able to really concentrate on stuff and report back in an efficient way and not be so distracted. And I don't know, somehow some of the teams and projects I'm on are working better remotely than they did live. Now, you can't do lab work very well that way, but in terms of design work, it's actually not so bad. Okay, last couple things. We're seeing some progress in cutting through bureaucracy and red tape. I mean, we could also overreact in that direction, but particularly I think we could overreact with global vaccination that's too soon and authoritarian actions that should never happen. It's interesting, if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, almost every one of them involves vaccination, which is interesting. They better get it right, you know, before they inject 10 billion people with this stuff. That's all I have to say. Even the FDA has been pivoting. You know, we saw that first with psychedelics, and now with some of the accelerated testing that's finally happening. We're even talking about how to deal with problems like homelessness and, you know, things that we just, in serious ways that we hadn't before. Prisoners, you know, there's things being discussed that were just totally outside the Overton window until recently. I think another great thing that's going to come from this is we're going to hopefully have a renewed appreciation for farmers, linemen, truck drivers, delivery people, grocery store clerks, healthcare workers, people who have to go out there and people who do go out there, and people who basically keep everything running so that we can survive in our bubbles here. I hope we have a new appreciation for them, and I think we will. And I would like to read this quote here from an article called "Thank You for Your Service and the Demilitarization of American Patriotism." Quote, "When all is said and done, perhaps we will recognize their sacrifice as true patriotism, saluting our doctors and nurses, genuflecting and saying, thank you for your service, as we do now for military veterans. We'll give them guaranteed health benefits and corporate discounts and build statues and have holidays for this new class of people who sacrifice their health and their lives for us. Perhaps too, we will finally start to understand patriotism as finally we'll understand patriotism more as cultivating the health and life of community rather than blowing up someone else's. Maybe the demilitarization of American patriotism and love of community will be one of the benefits to come out of this whole mess. So we might reduce polarization. We might be able to synthesize, as I've said before, some of the best of China and the USA system, best of the East and West. If China learns to not suppress information, and the US relearns to respect science and competent leaders who listen to experts, if the Chinese possibly recognize Dr. Li and make a day of honor for him. We may have to, as Eric Weinstein suggests, really take a reassessment of some of our institutions, particularly our medical, pharma, food establishment. On the other hand, a lot of good things are coming out of this. Real-time telemedicine is like becoming a real thing, a really good thing now. Erica's going to talk more about that in a future session in medical school, tele-education. We have an improved pipeline for therapeutics, which is hard though, because, and again, I don't need to keep stressing it, but global vaccines are now the big cash cow for big pharma, okay? These are trillion-dollar drugs now, because a lot of the things like statins and things like this are failing and people are going to stop doing them, I'm pretty sure. So we have to be careful about perverse incentives for mandatory global vaccination. I don't trust these companies. I've got to be honest about it. So hopefully we can have some public ownership of medicine so that vaccines and medicines and all this kind of equipment won't just be for profit, but will be actually be for benefit. Another good quote, quickly, however, Americans are being reacquainted with scientific concepts like germ theory and exponential growth. Unlike with tobacco use or climate change, science doubters will be able to see the impacts of the coronavirus immediately. At least for the next 35 years, I think we can expect that public respect for expertise, health, and epidemics to be at least partially restored. Okay, so I'm going to end with the spiritual side of it, and this is short, and then we're going to maybe look at a 1 or 2 minute video, and then we'll have a few minutes left. Okay, so I kind of view this in a way, and then this wonderful stop video came out, but I view this in a way potentially as like when a parent smacks a child or a dog. You know, you yell at a dog and you whack it on the butt. I mean, you sting it, you hurt it, you scare it, you teach it that you'll get hurt if you do this thing. I mean, I think that this is kind of what's happened here, right? We have been warned. We have been slapped down. We have not been killed or you know, damaged for forever. We've not been abused. We have been warned, okay? And I think this is kind of a spiritual thing. We have been warned as a planetary culture that we have not been, there's things we're not doing right. And it's a tragedy, but it's shared. And so in some sense that makes it beautiful. It's shared. It's not like really there's winners and losers here. So maybe we're going to make progress at a planetary spiritual level in this way, you know, thinking about releasing nonviolent offenders from prison and thinking about the general population, slums, homeless people, and you know, how we're actually all connected, how their health is our health. I'm going to say that there's one essay that says all this much better than I ever could. It's by Charles Eisenstein. It's called The Coronation. And I have listened to everything Eisenstein has ever done and read his books, and he is absolutely brilliant. And he's the only short form podcast I listen to. The other stuff just pales in comparison. Anyway, I'd been waiting for weeks for him to put out something on this virus. And finally he did, and I was not disappointed. He wrote a rather long essay, takes about half an hour to read. It's called The Coronation. It's really good. I'd love to read some excerpts from it, but I don't really have time. But I will just read one of the last paragraphs because I thought it's so good. For a long time, we as a collective have stood helpless in the face of an ever-sickening society. Whether it is declining health, decaying infrastructure, depression, suicide, addiction, ecological degradation, or concentration of wealth. The symptoms of civilizational malaise in the developed world are plain to see. We have been stuck in the systems and patterns that caused them. Now, COVID has gifted us a reset. So we all, to end now, I'm going to say we all think and talk and study incessantly about this pandemic these days. So I would implore all of us to think, talk, and study incessantly about the potential upsides. I hope we can revisit this topic, maybe more in a brainstorming, interactive way in some weeks, if Allison's willing to fit that into the schedule. And then last, maybe we could show with hands or something, who has seen that video, Stop, a Letter from the Virus? Okay, Ethan's seen it. Maybe not very many other people are raising their hands. Okay, who has seen the one called Thank You? I'll include the Stop one in the link. The Thank You one may be a little bit less well known. So it's 2.5 minutes long, and I'll play it and then I'm done. And Allison, I'll just send you the links on the chat, okay? So I'm gonna try and screen share and play this thing. And if you can't hear it, if it's crappy, just, I'll stop it and I'll send everyone the links, okay? So let's see now, share. And then, thank you. Oh. Can you see the screen?
If you send us a link,
Yes.
we get higher fidelity.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Thank you for shaking us and showing us we are dependent on something much bigger than we think. Thank you for making us appreciate the luxury we lived in, abundance of products, freedom, health, and realizing we were taking it for granted. Thank you for stopping us, to make us see how lost we were in the busyness, not having time for the most basic things. Thank you for allowing us to put aside all our problems we thought were so important and showing us what is actually important. Thank you for stopping the transport. The earth was begging us to look at the pollution for a very long time. We didn't listen. Thank you for all the fear. It has been a global disease for years, but not many of us wanted to face it. And now we have to face it and learn how to embrace it with love and with the support of our community. Thank you for this reevaluation of our lives. Thank you as we finally understand what it means that we are all connected. Thank you for the unity between all of us. We knew the world has to change. Thank you for helping us to undermine everything and giving us a chance to build the world from the very beginning. This virus is part of us. It's between us, in us. It connected us all, either physically or energetically. Gratitude supports the immune system, but also lets us see things from many perspectives. And it's up to us which perspective we will choose, but best is to be aware of all of them.
Okay, I'll end with that. So we have a little time for discussion, I guess, 5 minutes. So we're technically out of time and I've said enough.
Thank you, Creon.
Woo!
Nice.
Yeah. So I remember after the
Okay.
world. After
Yes,
the world
Brad, you go, and then please raise your hands if you have a question.
After the World Trade Center fell down, everyone said, "Oh my God, this changes everything. The world will never be the same. All rules are rewritten." And flying certainly changed, but not a lot of other things did, at least on the visible surface. So how do we know that's not what happens after this?
Well, I mean, presumably a lot more people are going to die, and it's going to be much more widely distributed, and I don't think it's going to be quite so easy to point at some particular out-group, in-group kind of enemy. It's a different sort of enemy if it's an enemy. It's a young enemy that we're all united against at any rate, which certainly wasn't the case after 9/11. Everybody was, everybody had their own favorite culprit. I don't know, Brad. Anyone else have a guess?
I'll take a stab at it. One of the things that I've been thinking about that is coming from the anthropology community is a long, over decades discussion that can basically be summed up and contextualized as on becoming human or being human, a discipline that went from studying the natives to the natives studying us, and they became our co-authors. It's an endeavor that we're doing together, and the conclusion that we're all connected, which the video you just showed, and that's the conclusion. And I think that our opportunity here, if we can insert this into thinking of as many people as we can, is that all of our actions, the things that we say and do, influence and affect all those that hear us and think about it, and both our actions and our words. So we have an opportunity for furthering this idea of how we're connected and how that impacts not just other people, but also animals and plants and our entire planet. So I see this as an extraordinary opportunity for us to understand how what we do and we say influences others.
Great. We have another one here.
Hello. I think the scale is also quite different in terms of impact. It's not true that 9/11 changed nearly every human on Earth's day-to-day for several months. I mean, it's just several orders of magnitude more disruptive. And I think that gets everyone's attention significantly more.
There's also a few, I think in the Anders Salon and in the Jan Tallinn Salon, we discussed a few specific things that could be put in place maybe after this that are a little more technical, like relating to prediction markets and platforms like that, and actually pushing for, I guess, like evidence-based policymaking. So I think there's a few more, I guess, like action items after that. And then I think narrative shaping is one that comes up at almost every salon, right? At every salon that we talk about, somewhat of like, well, there's two potential narratives out of this. One is more divisive, one is more cooperative, and there's currently a vacuum around those. And I think this is also, for a call for artists and a call for narrative makers to step in. Adam, what do you think? And Bodhi, what do you think?
Sorry, yeah, we've got a young salon attendee. I mean, my takeaway from this is to accentuate two things that I think Creon said. One of which is one reason this could be a good news is that viruses are the #1 existential threat for our civilization. Like, much scarier than nuclear war. That viruses could kill everyone and nuclear war won't. But COVID is not an existential threat. And if you look back at SARS in 2003, I think with the benefit of hindsight, that saved an immense number of lives. It killed less than 1,000 people, and yet it made the Far East pretty much ready for this when it came, and probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives in the Far East or more. So maybe COVID is the SARS of whatever the next big one is, and that it costs hundreds of thousands or millions of lives and saves billions of lives. And then from another sort of personal point of view, a good thing of something that's really struck me with COVID is that anything is possible. And all these radical changes that people said were impossible, you know, you can, they've all happened. They've all, anything is possible. The only missing ingredient is political will. That's it. Sorry, Will.
My question was fantastic, but let's not talk about just it. Let's talk about some other questions.
All right, any other question?
Comment on the salon.
We have a silly question over here.
Does this mean that you're going to advocate for more vintage purchases at the embassy with me?
I didn't hear that exactly. Something about the embassy?
Yeah. Does this mean that you're going to advocate for more vintage purchases at the embassy with me?
Yeah, that's touche. That's all I have to say about that.
All right, great. I'm gonna see, are there any other more questions? I think you've really taken us kind of like on a wild ride through all of the potential upsides of this. And I don't see any other questions. I think, you know, like one thing, you know, that I think Adam alluded to, and that I think really comes out of this, and it also relates to the narrative grabbing, is that, you know, things are as good as we make them be, right? Like, I think all actions are on the table now, you know, like anything is possible with the right political will. So I think, you know, like currently we've seen like a lot of lockdown and a few things that like have potentially negatively affected people. But like, I think if we're only ambitious enough, then the same kind of like window is opening up right now, like, you know, to the positive. So I think we should be thinking really hard on, yeah, Jay, you started screen sharing, well done. We should be thinking really hard on what exactly that is that we want to get out of this. And Creon and I have actually talked about making this like one of potentially many. Jay, please stop screen sharing. And potentially having like more than just one of those, and maybe doing like a weekly check-in on like what are new potential upsides that are popping up right now, and what are kind of like windows of opportunity of opportunity that could be pushed open right now. So I invite you all to join future meetings of this kind, maybe once a week, maybe once a month. Let's see how long this home confinement lasts. But this would be like, I think it's just like a call to action to now start collecting those specific opportunities. Do you have anything to add, Creon?
Just thank you. Thank you for your loving, kind words at the beginning, and thank you for hosting all these, and thank you for inviting me to brainstorm with you.
It's Allison.
We love you.
Allison, it's going to last until Easter. Donald Trump recently moved Easter to later in the month. So.
New Easter again? I forgot.
Yeah.
Wasn't it the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox?
Trump thinks he's very powerful.
Okay.
He's the most powerful.
All right.
The most powerful possible.
Hey, Creon, actually, can I get one last question? At the very beginning, you said this would bring on a bunch of advances in new medical knowledge. And I'm wondering which technology specifically you think would advance. Do you think it's items like CRISPR, or do you think it'll be all the big data?
No, that's, I don't mean to be how can I say, to be a cantankerous old dude or something. No, you're missing the point. Those things are just tools. They're just, those are like, that's like saying, is it going to bring on an advance in screwdriver design or design of, you know, that's not the point. It's going to bring an advance in understanding. It's not going to be an advance in 3D printers or drones or CRISPR or name your, or AI or name your favorite technology. It's going to bring an advance in understanding of virology, immunology, molecular biology, and hopefully systems biology, which is really at the root of the problem here. The biological system, the human immune system is pretty much the most complicated part of human biology. with the possible exception of human development, you know, from embryonic development. Okay, the immune system is like the most complex thing, and because it's always changing, and it's got just a whole ton of.
I'm going to go with the brain, Creon.
The brain is more static. Okay, the brain isn't as molecularly complex as the immune system. It may be informationally more complex and structurally more complex, but in terms of the molecular biology of it, I don't believe it's more complex. But you know, fine. Certainly on some axes, the brain is much more complex. But then the immune system is the next most complex, even in terms of information processing. And that's what's going to be advanced, is our understanding. We may develop technologies or advanced technologies as part of it, and those technologies may have further uses down the line, like PCR, which largely had its renaissance during the AIDS crisis, you know, became immensely useful for all kinds of things. But it's not the technology that's important, it's the understanding. This is the thing about our community here. Most of us are tool builders, but don't forget why you build the tools, or why the tools are valuable. Anyway, thank you, great question.
All right, a call to action for more understanding. Amazing, Creon. Thank you so much. We're cheering for you with lots of glasses. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
We missed you dearly. We missed you dearly. You're kind of simulated in all of our conversations, and we have someone on the treadmills. We are like also giving you a cheer here. We have people eating. We have people doing all sorts of things, but everyone is now getting better at understanding. And I welcome all of you to join those on a more regular level. And I see Anita is cheering you too with a major cocktail. So I think we're now starting cocktail hour. It was so lovely to see you. Bye bye, Creon. There's no sanitary.
Thanks, everyone.
Tomorrow evening, Sanity Preserver at 6 p.m. Bye bye, everyone.